You send the third message of the day, the one you told yourself you would not send, and somewhere in your chest you already know it makes you look exactly like the person you are trying not to be. But you send it anyway because the alternative, sitting in silence not knowing, feels unbearable. Here is what almost nobody tells you. That reaction is not weakness, and it is not who you actually are. It is a learned response, installed by a very specific pattern. And by the fourth sign in this video, you will recognize exactly where it came from and the precise moment it started running your life without your permission. There is a version of you that existed before her, one who did not check a phone every few minutes, who did not read 3 meanings into a delayed reply, who did not need constant reassurance to feel steady in a relationship. Somewhere along the way, that version disappeared, replaced by someone who feels desperate for attention they use to give freely without a second thought. You did not start out needy. You became needy slowly, one inconsistent signal at a time, until reaching for reassurance became the only language you knew how to speak. I know this shift from the inside, because I lived through it before I understood what was actually causing it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why this happened to you, and the specific steps that will get the old version of you back. Here is what almost nobody explains about emotional neediness, especially the kind that shows up after loving an avoidant woman. It is rarely a personality flaw. It looks like one from the outside, and it certainly feels like one from the inside. But what actually happened is closer to a system adapting to a broken feedback loop, one where affection arrived unpredictably enough that your nervous system started working overtime just to locate it. You have probably felt this shift happening in real time. Maybe you notice yourself checking her online status multiple times an hour, something you never did in earlier relationships. Maybe you notice a small silence from her turning into an entire afternoon of anxious spiraling, rehearsing what you might have done wrong. Maybe it was smaller than that, a compulsion to seek approval in a way that felt foreign to you, apologizing for things that did not need an apology, just to see her soften again. But here is the part almost nobody says clearly. What looks like neediness on the surface is often a nervous system trying to recreate safety in a relationship that never reliably offered it in the first place. And once you see the mechanism behind it, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. If this was installed, can it actually be uninstalled? Stay with me, because that answer comes later in this video, and it changes how you see every anxious urge you have felt since. If that sounds like an excuse to let yourself off the hook completely, stay with this, because it is not permission to stay stuck. It is a starting point for understanding why the usual advice, just stop being needy, never actually works. To be clear, this is not a video telling you neediness is entirely her fault, or that you carry no responsibility for how you show up now. This is about understanding the real mechanism underneath it, so the fix you choose actually addresses the cause instead of the symptom. Let us get into it. The first thing to understand is where this neediness actually comes from. An avoidant woman rarely rejects you outright and rarely commits fully either. Instead, she offers just enough warmth to keep you engaged, followed by just enough distance to make that warmth feel uncertain again. This pattern, sometimes called intermittent reinforcement, is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms that exists, more addictive than consistent affection, because your brain never knows when a reward is coming. Over time, your nervous system stops trusting connection to simply be there and starts monitoring for it constantly instead, checking, scanning, seeking small signs that reassurance is still available. That monitoring is what neediness actually is, an exhausted alarm system, not a character defect. The second thing to understand is why this pattern feels so hard to walk away from, even once you can see it clearly. Anxious attachment behavior does not develop because you are weak. It develops because somewhere earlier in your life, likely long before this relationship, closeness already felt unreliable, and this relationship simply reactivated that old wiring at full volume. She did not create the wound. She found the exact shape of one that was already there, and the intensity you feel now is a collision of an old fear meeting a new trigger. Keep this in mind, because it directly explains a fourth sign I promised you at the start, the exact moment this pattern took hold. Here's where most people go wrong trying to fix this, in one of two directions. Some try to suppress the neediness entirely, forcing themselves not to text, not to ask, not to seek any reassurance at all, mistaking silence for strength, only to feel the pressure build until it explodes in an even more anxious moment later. Others swing the opposite way, deciding they need to become completely independent overnight, cutting off any desire for closeness at all, calling it healing when it is actually just avoidance wearing a healthier costume. Neither approach works, because both skip the actual step required. Learning to soothe the alarm system directly instead of fighting behavior produces. Because here is what rarely gets said clearly enough. Neediness is not cured by willpower. It is cured by consistency, specifically the consistency you learn to give yourself, since she was never able to reliably provide it. The third step is building a personal baseline of reassurance that does not depend on her response time. This means noticing the urge to check her status, and instead of following it, asking what you actually need in that moment, calm, distraction, grounding, and providing that for yourself directly, even briefly. This will feel unnatural at first, because your system has been trained to only accept relief from her. Picture this in practice. The urge hits to send a follow-up message after 2 hours of silence. Instead of sending it, you name the actual feeling, likely fear of abandonment or fear of being forgotten, and you sit with it for 5 minutes without acting on it. Most of the time, the urge fades faster than expected once it is named rather than obeyed. Each time you do this, the alarm gets a little quieter, because it is finally learning that the world does not end when reassurance is delayed. Now here's the moment I promised you earlier, the exact point this pattern took hold. And it is smaller than you expect. It was not one dramatic betrayal. It was the first time her sudden distance worked, the first time it made you try harder instead of walking away, and your nervous system quietly filed that away as the formula for keeping her close. That single successful repetition is often all it takes to install the entire cycle, and recognizing that fourth sign, the moment your efforts spike right after withdrawal, is often the exact memory that unlocks everything else in this video. There's also a deeper layer worth naming here. Some of what feels like neediness toward her is actually grief in disguise. Grief for the certainty you never got. Grief for the version of the relationship you kept hoping would show up consistently. Confusing grief for neediness keeps you stuck chasing her, because grief wants what it lost, while neediness wants relief from discomfort. Learning to tell these apart matters, because the guidance for each is different. Grief needs space to be felt and eventually released. Neediness needs regulation and self-soothing skills you build over time. Which brings up the real question underneath all of this. Not, how do I stop wanting reassurance? But, how do I build a version of safety that does not depend on someone whose consistency was never guaranteed to begin with? Because there's a version of healing this that is genuinely complete. One where your calm no longer rises and falls with her replies, where you can want closeness without spiraling the moment it is delayed. That version takes real practice, patience with yourself, and often support outside the relationship itself, whether therapy, a trusted friend, or consistent self-work. The fourth and clearest step is rebuilding your identity outside the relationship entirely. Much of the neediness that develops around an avoidant woman comes from too much emotional bandwidth being funneled into decoding her, leaving very little left for your own life, your own goals, your own friendships. Reinvesting that attention back into yourself is not a distraction technique. It directly reduces the intensity of the alarm, because a full life gives your nervous system other sources of stability besides one uncertain person. Here is what matters most if you recognize yourself somewhere in this video right now. Being needy right now does not mean you are broken, and it does not mean you will always be this way. It means your nervous system adapted to a relationship that trained it to expect scarcity, and adaptation can be reversed the same way it was created, through repetition. Just repetition pointed in a healthier direction this time. You did not become needy because you loved wrong. You became needy because you were solving for uncertainty the only way your body knew how. So there are two honest paths forward from here, and neither one requires you to shame yourself into change. If you are still in this relationship, the honest path is not begging for more consistency than she is currently able to give, and it is not pretending you need nothing at all either. It is building your own steadiness alongside whatever she is or is not offering. So your peace stops depending entirely on her next reply. If you have already left or are considering it, the honest path is not rushing to prove you are fine now by suppressing every need you have. It is giving yourself the actual repetition required to retrain the alarm patiently, without expecting it to disappear overnight. Both paths are valid, and neither one makes you weak or behind. Because the goal was never to become someone who needs nothing from anyone. The goal is to become someone whose need for closeness no longer depends on chasing a person whose consistency was never reliable to begin with. And that steadiness starts right now.